Morning. It's Friday, November 8, 2013. I'd like to welcome everyone to our live Ask the Experts web panel. My name is Chris Grams. I'm with CME Group, and I'll be moderating this morning's discussion. I've invited two grain experts to provide their outlook ahead of this morning's USDA 2012 crop production and WASDE reports. Before I introduce our experts, I want to remind everyone who's joining us online that you can interact with our experts by submitting questions. Look at the box in your lower right-hand corner. There's a place for you to submit questions online, and we'll make sure those questions get answered by our grain experts this morning. I also want to note that a archived version of this panel discussion will be available later today on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/CME Group TV. At this point, I'd like to briefly introduce our experts. At the far end of the table, Joe Vaclavik, who's the president of Standard Grain. He's founder and president of Standard Grain, graduate of University of Illinois with a degree in agribusiness, farm, and financial management. Joe's been featured in news outlets such as CNBC, Bloomberg, Dow Jones, Reuters, U.S. Farm Report, Will Radio, and Wall Street Journal. Mr. Vaclavik personally authors Standard Grain's market commentary each morning, and he can be heard on a morning at 7:50 a.m. on KFRM radio in Kansas and Oklahoma, and also a regular guest on Will Radio in Illinois. And thank you, Joe, for running over from your 7:50 a.m. Radio show this morning. Appreciate it. To the right of Joe is Jack Scoville, who is vice president of the Price Futures Group. Jack is a VP and a futures market analyst with the Price Futures Group, specializing in grains, softs, rice, oilseeds, and tropical products such as coffee and sugar. Jack began working in the futures industry over 30 years ago, spent 10 years working on the floor of the Chicago Board of Trade in various roles. He offers brokerage service to an international clientele of agricultural producers, processors, exporters, and other professional traders. Mr. Scoville has been a broker off the floor since then and has been with Price Futures Group since it was established in 1988. Pardon me. Well, in 3 short hours, the USDA will publish its November 8th crop production report. And as we know, some of the one impact of the U.S. government shutdown was that we did not have a crop production report in October. So we are looking to the USDA to potentially update some numbers here in November. I guess before we sort of dig into expectations for the specific grains that we typically cover, corn, soybeans, and wheat, I would just sort of pose an opening question to both Joe and Jack. What surprises, if any, do you think that we'll see as a result of not having had this report in October and now seeing more data coming out of USDA November? Gentlemen, I just sort of pose that question to you. Any surprises? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the room for surprise is probably in 2 areas. One would be what the soybean production could be. I think people seem pretty well assured that we're going to have a pretty sizable corn crop, 14 billion bushels, maybe a touch more. But the bean crop is where we saw some more variation in the yields, and of course that's the crop that really got stressed by the late summer, warmer and drier weather situation that we had here. I also think where there are chances for surprises will be on the demand side, and that's probably more in the soybeans, where our demand has been so extremely strong up until now. And I think it'll be very, very interesting to see what USDA thinks about future demand and what they do, especially to our export demand numbers in the reports here today. So those are a couple of the areas that I'm going to be looking at. Over in the rice, probably I'll be looking at just the overall picture. I think those could be very interesting numbers. The market's been fairly low priced as of late, and the cash market really holding a little stronger than the futures market might indicate. So I think it'll be a very, very interesting report for that market as well. And wheat, demand up until now holding really pretty strong, and we'll be very, very interested to see if USDA feels that can continue as well, and I think that that's a potential for perhaps a surprising number. We're looking for a good, strong demand number, and we'll see if it actually shows up.
I think the acreage situation could be a big wild card. FSA told us here a couple of months ago that we had big prevent plant acres in corn and in soybeans. Over this past spring, excessively wet conditions throughout a lot of the Corn Belt, parts of Iowa, parts of southern Minnesota, really a lot of problems there. So they told us we had 3.5 million acres of corn and just under 2 million acres of beans that went into prevent plant. Now, historically, there's very, very little correlation between those numbers and USDA's actual numbers. Historically, it would kind of tell us that we might lose 1 million acres of corn off the harvested acreage number. Beans might be a little bit less than that, but that could be one big surprise here today, given that we haven't seen anything from the USDA in 2 months. The other thing on this production side, I think both the corn and soybean production numbers are more of a wild card than a lot of people would like to admit. The last time we had a report on September 12th was before any real harvest activity had taken place in a significant way here in the U.S. And you've also got to keep in mind that the government and the USDA were closed through the 3rd week in October, so they've really had a limited amount of time to put this data together. So I guess I question whether or not they're going to come out and really bump up these corn yields and soybean yields and production estimates as big as some people might think on this particular report. Now, ultimately, I do believe that the corn crop's very big. I believe it's in excess of 14 billion bushels. Ultimately, I believe that the soybean crop's a lot better than the previous USDA reports would suggest, but I don't necessarily know for a fact that we're going to see those increases show up here today. On the demand side, I think it's the same kind of deal. Prices are a lot lower than they were in corn and soybeans, not necessarily in wheat, but a lot lower since the last report. And we'll see if demand kind of adjusts for that. Is the export demand numbers going to go up? They certainly should, based on the sales that we've seen. Are the ethanol numbers going to go up, which they certainly should, based on some of the demand that we've seen? So I think that there's just a lot of big-time question marks going into this thing.
We've sort of backed ourselves into the discussion of yield expectations here a little bit, but Jack, is there anything that you would add in terms of your own personal expectations, the expectations of Price Futures Group for corn, soybeans, or even to some extent some people may be looking at wheat, but I think corn and soybeans are really what people are looking at for today's report?
Well, in terms of production, I think so. I personally expect USDA to show a pretty high yield number, especially over in the corn. The anecdotal reports that you've had out in the country have really been super. The crop really performed very, very well. The average trade guess for yield is about 159.5 bushels per acre, and it could certainly easily be that much. Could even be a little bit more. And I suspect USDA should have been able to gather enough data, even with the shutdowns, to know that the yield's probably going to be that big. We'll see exactly how much area USDA. I agree that there is a wild card with the harvested acreage expectation, and that's really probably going to be the major determinant over in the corn side as to what our eventual production would be. But all indications are it's going to be a big crop. So if USDA probably doesn't exactly show all that, I'm not too sure the market's really going to believe that too well. And we'll see what happens. I personally think our crop's going to be well in excess of 14 billion bushels myself, at least 14.1, perhaps even a little bit higher than that. But we'll see what USDA has to say about that. I also think I think we're going to we'll keep an eye on the bean yields as well. The bean yields are probably where the biggest question mark is. And that's the one where USDA is going to have the toughest time coming up with a really, really good estimate, in my opinion. The corn seems to be a little bit more cut and dry, but the beans really yields lately have been much more variable than they were to start the season, and so I think that's where there is a chance for a big surprise. I think over on the world side, we'll keep a very close eye on some numbers as well, especially what USDA has to say about the Southern Hemisphere production with the problems lately down in Australia. But with South America off to a really, really good start so far this year.
Thanks, Jack. Joe, do you have any other thoughts on yield expectations? Do you agree with Jack? Is there anywhere where you would like to add to that?
I agree certainly that that yield reports would suggest that we should have some very, very big numbers. I think that ultimately we're looking at a corn yield number nationally somewhere in that low to mid 160s. If it ends up being really good, you could be up to those 2009 levels, which were just south of 165. Soybeans is certainly a much bigger wild card, but soybean yields nationally that we've heard in yield reports would also suggest that you've got a big number, maybe even a little bit bigger number than some of these pre-report trade estimates suggest. I wouldn't be surprised at all if our final yield number in January in these beans was over 43, maybe even 44 bushels per acre, which would be considered pretty bearish here in the scheme of things. So the total production numbers, I don't disagree that corn's north of 14 billion. I don't disagree that beans are north of 3.2, 3.3 billion bushels. But I guess my question in all of this is when does the USDA make that adjustment, and is it going to be today?